Are you considering renting out your home or potentially buying a rental property, but you don't know where to start? Stay to the end of this video and I'll show you exactly how I run my expenses from real life examples that I've had with properties, and to know if the property will actually produce money for you at the end of the month. So in this example, we will be using a duplex, and we're going to assume each side is exactly the same. So same square footage, same finishes, same rent, and everything. So I'm going to bring you up on the trusty iPad here. So we have a purchase price of $240,000. That's the initial market value and the purchase price. So this is the value of the property. And keep in mind, we are just running very simple profit and loss. We're just running expenses here. I'm not factoring in any creative financing strategies, any value add strategies. This is just nuts and bolts of income and expenses for rental properties from a single family house up to about a 6 unit, or probably a 5 unit, from a single family house up to a 5 unit. A purchase price of $240,000, that should let you know right away that the rent better be $2,400 or it's not going to cash flow. So that's a 1% RV ratio, 1% rent to value. I've covered that in previous videos. I'm going to assume an 80% loan to value mortgage, which is where we have this $192,000. That mortgage is at a 4% interest rate. So I know rates are low. You can even get them probably sub 2 now. But I always want to make sure that when the environment changes, and I believe it will change eventually, rates will eventually go back up, you want to make sure that this property still makes sense during that time. And then every time I'm assessing or I'm evaluating or underwriting a new property, I will reassess the lending environment at that time. So I like to have about a 4% buffer currently. So that's what I use for my interest rate. So you want to be conservative. You want to find out that you made money instead of lost money at the end of the month or at the end of the year. So now we're going to get into the rent. And as I said, this duplex is completely similar. Each side rents for the same amount, $1,000 a month, which gives us a gross income of $2,000 a month in gross rental income. From that, you always want to subtract vacancy. And what I put vacancy at is 8%. And that's accounting for that once a year, on average. If you were to have a turnover, it's accounting for that month's worth of rent payments. So I know a lot of people will say, oh, well, my sub-market or my market has a 2% vacancy or a 1% vacancy. That's great, but you still have to factor that cost when that turnover comes. So I like to use 8. I know banks will accept 5% because that's what appraisers use, but we're looking at this for our own perspective. We want to know if we'll make money or not. So to be realistic, make sure you always put 8% for vacancy. That's what I do. Then your next line, other. This can be any other source of income that the property generates. So whether you rent out parking, you rent out storage space, you rent out internet and cable, or you have any other source of income on the property, coin-operated laundry, anything of that nature. And then you would add that, you would add the other plus the rent and subtract the vacancy, would give you a operating income of $1,840. So now let's dive into the expenses. Insurance. So this is something to keep in mind. Always verify. Remember those words when you're looking at realtor pro formas or seller financials. Always verify. Prove that it's true. So what I mean by that is, with the insurance, if a realtor or the seller provides you the existing insurance or what they think the insurance might be, that there's no way that number would be similar. So what I would do is reach out to insurance providers and ask them to provide a quote for your situation, because everybody's situation is different. You might be at a different risk level than the person who had the property before you. A lot depends on your experience. Sometimes it depends on your age. It can depend on if you've had claims in the past. There's so many different factors that I would want to know precisely what that number will be for me. I don't care who it was for the previous owner. So find out what the insurance is. And then as you start to understand and you start to do this more, you will see and you'll learn what insurance typically is for a specific property, and then you'll be able to kind of narrow it down with a pretty quick estimate without having to go through the hoops of figuring out that quote for yourself. Next is management fees. So management fees, I keep at 10% no matter what. And I know this is common debate in the real estate community, especially for people that are just starting out and they think that by managing the properties themselves, they're saving money and they don't have to account for it. The truth is, there's going to be time and energy spent, and you have to value your time and you have to value the time of whatever it is that you're doing or whatever it is anyone is doing. And you need to put a number on it. Because if you're like me and you want to retire and you want to have a full, well oiled machine, a well operating business that spits off money to you, you want to build it with scale in mind. So as I acquire more and more property, especially at a distance in cities that I don't live in, I don't have time to chase tenants around. I don't have time to collect rent payments. Don't have time to rescrew and fix burnt light bulbs or give them keys when they're locked out in the middle of the night. That is not worth it to me. If I had 2 phone calls and in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day even, I had to go down and run down to the property with commute, with time, stopping at Home Depot, whatever it is, that's 5-6 hours of my day of my month gone because of that. I would happily pay the $184 for property management to deal with that for me. So you want to build your business to make you as replaceable as possible and to make it run without you. So I just think it's foolish when people don't include that as a cost because it is a cost, especially when it comes to financing or when it comes to reselling the property. There's always going to be a percentage for management. So whether the appraiser might use 5%, most likely it's 10 on buildings of this size. When you start to get larger, say 25, 30, 60, 100 unit plus, that's when you really start to see that percentage shrink, the management percentage shrink. But for our purposes, it's going to be 10%. There's going to be placement fees. There's going to be other ongoing maintenance costs and trips to the property. It's a 10% cost at a minimum for property management. Next is your property taxes. Just like I said before, verify always. Always verify. So this is a big one, and I've seen some investors get absolutely wiped out because they do not understand this. So as an example with property taxes in New Brunswick, whenever a sale happens, whenever there's a verified transaction and the title exchanges hands, whatever the property is sold for at that last transaction value is the value at which it's assessed, and the property taxes reflect that. So what that means is that if a property was once purchased for 100 grand and then 20 years later they sell it to you for 300 grand, that means that now your property tax bill has tripled because it's reset at that last transaction value. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to find out how property taxes are assessed in your market, and you're going to want to contact your local tax assessor and figure out those mill rates. Sometimes there's calculators online, but I wouldn't trust those. I've noticed that some of them have errors because regulations and things change. So you're going to want to figure out exactly what that property tax will be once you own the property at whatever that transaction value is. So I've seen investors that had assumed that the property taxes would be of the previous owner, and the transaction value could have happened years ago, decades ago. And then when they took over the property, they got hit with this new massive tax bill and it just wiped out their cash flow. So always verify. Next, we have water and sewer. I'm going to assume that the tenants are paying for these, but typically I budget $40 a month per unit. Next is garbage. This is once you start to get to larger buildings, larger complexes, typically 6 units and up, you'll have one localized garbage bin. It won't be with the city. You won't have your typical standard garbage and recycling bins provided from your city. These are typically done on, like I said, these larger bins are done from third-party providers who will come either bi-weekly or monthly, and they'll empty the bin and so forth. That typically ranges on the 24-unit building that we have. It's around $200 to $250 a month, so something to keep in mind. Next is snow removal. I could go on and on about the details of a lot of these, but I'm trying to keep it very, very high level and simple. But for snow removal, I mean, depends obviously where you live, but in Winnipeg, we have very strict bylaw officers and bylaw enforcements and stuff like that here in the city, regulations. And if, I guess a better example is landscaping in Winnipeg. So I had grass that had overgrown by half an inch, and someone called, or the bylaw officer was driving by and he decided to get out and measure it. And I actually had a fine sent to me for roughly just shy of $400. It just came right off pre-authorized on my property tax bill. I couldn't fight it, couldn't address it. You don't even know about it. You just get a letter in the mail saying you got to cut it in X number of days. If it's not cut on that last day, which I mean, I guess it would have been my fault. And when it wasn't cut, they just pull it off your property taxes, just like that. If you don't have the money in the account, you get 2% annually or 2% monthly compounded interest on the outstanding balance. It's a full-blown racket. But regardless, it's something to keep in mind, because if you have the tenant, you say in the lease you're responsible for cutting the grass and the snow. I mean, good luck trying to get them to maintain that and do a proper job of it. So you might have to budget in there if there's a lot of grass on the property or there's a big walk up to the building. You're going to have to budget probably a couple $100 a month for either or, and yeah, that's no fun. Next, we have capital improvements and maintenance and repairs. So these are two different things, and there's several misconceptions about those. Maintenance and repairs, I always have at 10%. I've never seen it less than 10%. It's a very rare situation when your building has a maintenance budget less than 10%. And when I say budget, I mean you just keep this in the account. So maybe a couple months goes by where it's not used, that $184 just sits in the account and it accumulates. But then you're going to get hit with something for $750, or you're going to have to get a plumber to come in and drain snake the sewer because someone was flushing something they shouldn't have flushed down the toilet, and eventually it comes out. So your maintenance and repairs are always going to run around 10% and beyond. Some people will argue that, oh, well, I have a brand new building or a brand new house. It's a new build, so my maintenance and repairs should be low. That's great, I guess, if you're running a new build property, but when I ran my numbers, I've never seen a new build cash flow. So if you have some, niche market, or you have some insider knowledge, or you run a construction company, or you have some other factor that enables that to make sense for you, then that's excellent. But for my scenario, I'm typically buying older buildings, definitely 1960s and beyond, sometimes up to 100-year-old buildings. So there's definitely maintenance and repair issues, but then that's why you get made up for it in the cash flow. So maintenance and repairs, always 10% of your annual income. Expenditures and improvements, so CapEx and improvements, I run that at a 5%. So you're probably wondering, what's the difference between a capital expenditure and what's the difference between a repair? So a repair is if you have a hot water tank go and you replace the hot water tank, it's a replacement, it's not an improvement. A capital expenditure or an improvement is when, say, you have a laminate countertop that gets cracked, or there's burn markings, or you're replacing it for whatever reason, and then you upgrade it to granite. So now that's an improvement. And I'm going to do another video on how you can reflect that in your taxes so that you can actually increase your adjusted cost base. So when you go to sell a property, you'll pay less capital gains, versus if you want to have more income now through cash flow, you can reduce your tax payable by allocating more of your improvements or repairs to maintenance and repairs. So that's for another video. But long story short, capital improvements, I always have at 5%. Because over time, you're going to want to improve the building, especially during turnover, so that you can keep up to rental standards and keep demanding a higher rent as time progresses. The next line is security. I don't have anything in this for this single family house, but this is where if you had some central alarm system or surveillance or any other type of security contracts, make sure you put that in. Next is gas and oil. For gas and oil, you'd want to, or it's just heating in general. So it depends where you are. Obviously, in your warm climate, this probably won't be much of an issue, but up in Canada here, where it's a colder climate, you're going to want to budget at least $100 a month per unit if the tenants are not paying for it. In this example, I've assumed that the tenants are, but typically it's $100 a month. You're probably saying, oh, well, why is it $100 a month? In the summer months, clearly they're not running heat. Yes, that's because I'm budgeting that in the winter, sometimes these bills go from $100 to $300 a month. So that $100 a month that I budget averages out throughout the year. Sorry, I skipped a few here. Bookkeeping and legal. This is another one of those things where you have to value your time. You're probably like, oh, I don't have a bookkeeper yet, or I do my own taxes at the end of the year. Whatever it is, that's great, but there's still time and energy that needs to be spent there by someone. And if you're trying to scale this business, your time is better spent doing other things, such as finding deals, raising capital, or whatever else better task you can be doing. You can hire this out to professionals who are going to do it far better than you, more efficient than you, and at a cheaper cost than you. So how I budget for bookkeeping and legal is about $200 a unit per year. So I always make sure I put that in when I run my numbers. And lastly, we have this section, contracts and rentals. Those are, they should be split into two different ones. Contracts is any other third-party contract that is involved with managing that property. So whether you have fire inspection, an annual fire inspection, fire safety, anything like that that's in place, you want to make sure that you're contacting the owner and getting them to show you. Most likely when you are trying to purchase a property, you're asking for the last, like the T12, the last trailing 12 months of financials. If you can get 3 years, that's even better. And you can try and figure out what these other added costs might be. The other one is rentals. So that's anything on the property that you actually do not own and you're leasing. So that could be hot water tanks, coin operated laundry, washer and dryer, any other appliances or major mechanical systems can be rented. So you want to make sure you know what those are and what those costs are going to be if you assume them, and you want to contact those providers and make sure you know those numbers exactly. So all said and done, with a property that had a purchase price of $240,000, not a 1% rule, the rents were $2,000 a month, so $1,000 aside. After vacancy, it gives us an operating income of $1,840. From there, we subtract all the expenses, which is $962, giving us a net operating income of $878. Subtract the mortgage payment of $1,010, gives us a whopping cash flow of negative $132. So you're probably wondering, why is it negative? I mean, there's several expenses that are on the tenants. I may have been more aggressive than most people think with vacancy and management and maintenance and repairs, where in reality it's actually very conservative. But it's because the revenue isn't there. It's because we're not meeting that 1% RV ratio, rent to value ratio. So let me show you as an example. If I bump these rents up to $1,200 a unit, making it $2,400 a month in gross rent, 1% of the purchase price, which was $240,000, a cash flow of $144 a month. So, I mean, that's not absolutely terrible. It's just shy of $75 a month. Cash flow per door is what it used to kind of be the average. I would definitely try to aim for about anything 100 and plus per unit per month in cash flow. But obviously that's not where you're getting, that's not all the wealth you're creating. You're getting your debt pay down, you're getting some appreciation, and hopefully you're able to force value. But as I said, with this one, we're just running simple numbers just to see all the different types of expenses that I include and the percentages of those expenses. So hopefully you got some value. Hope you're able to now run your expenses accordingly and know that you will, if you will or will not, be profitable at the end of each and every month. So thank you. I'll see you in the next video.